Good afternoon, Joe. How are you doing today?
I am good. How are you, man?
I'm good, or at least what passes for good these days. I'm relatively sane, family's happy and healthy, and I'm wondering what the hell's going on with the world, but we're getting by. We're getting
You
by.
meant how I'm doing. You meant that
In
how I'm
life,
doing.
man. In
You
life.
meant that how I'm doing. Yeah, no, I like, there are some days where I'm not well, man, because the condition of the planet, particularly the condition of the United States, has me very concerned.
And there's something specific that I wanted us to chat about today. It goes back to a comment I heard, and I wish I could cite it, but I'm not too worried because I think it's probably happened many times. But it was when Caroline Levitt said something to the effect of, "Oh, there are all these stupid protesters outside, and they they just don't understand that Trump has all of the power." And as I saw this, I came across something called the 3.5% rule. And it also got me thinking about salt in India. So I thought it was worth it for us to have a conversation about that. What do you think?
I love that. I like that a lot.
Power moves in the shadows and out in the open. Do you see it? Hosted by Jeff Lair, Masters of Influence uncovers the tactics of persuasion, control, and decision making that shape history, business, and everyday life. Through stories, interviews, and expert insights, we pull back the curtain on the forces shaping our world. Let's decode power together.
All right. So I don't know. I know Gandhi. Everybody knows Mahatma Gandhi and what happened in India. I suppose people do. But if you don't, go study it. Gandhi was certainly an interesting guy. But
Watch the movie if you haven't watched the movie.
watch the
It was
movie,
a pivotal point
read
in
the
my
book.
life. Read the book, watch the movie. You'll get it. You don't just get who he is. You get what's possible.
What's possible. And that's what I
Yeah.
want to come to today, right? Because I think normally when we talk about power, we're talking about it being defined by force, right? Power is defined by who has the biggest guns, who is the strongest, who has that political or legitimate power. And I think that's the thing that Levitt was talking about when she was saying, hey, Trump has all of the power.
Hmm.
Trump is the strong man. Trump has the power and you have no power against him. That really got me thinking of Gandhi and a very specific event. And you mentioned the movie. This is actually very well depicted in the movie itself. And it is when Gandhi challenged the British rule in the Salt March of 1930.
Hmm.
And basically, what happened was this. First, it's important to realize that the British controlled India. And it wasn't just the land, it wasn't just the powers that be, but they controlled the basics of daily life. And one of the most infuriating rules was a law that made it illegal for Indians to produce or sell their own salt. And I don't know, Joe, if you've ever experienced India or Indian cuisine, but I don't think it's an insult to say that these guys like spice.
Just a little bit. Just a
Just
little
a
bit.
little bit,
Just a
right?
little bit. They like spice.
So it's like you're taking away this substance that's so basic and essential to that. It's like the first spice, the base spice. Yeah. But the British taxed it, they controlled it, and they turned it into a tool of oppression by making sure that the Indians could only get it from the British. So Gandhi saw that as a point of leverage and he did something truly audacious. So he staged an sorry, he didn't stage an armed rebellion. So Gandhi was not a large man. Gandhi did not have an army and he didn't call for riots. So what he did is he walked for 24 days and he's walking to the Arabian Sea. And as he's walking, this is 240 miles, and he's gathering followers, and hundreds of people come to him. And this is building up to be a really big deal. And on April 16th, he arrives. Actually, on April 5th, 1930, he arrives at the coast. And on April 6th, 1930, he did the unthinkable thing that broke the British Empire. You know what it was?
Produce some
He,
salt.
he picked up some natural salt.
He
Right?
picked up some salt.
He just
Yeah.
picked up some salt from the ground. And just like that, he broke the law and he stood up the British Empire. So this was he stood up to the British Empire. This was the thing. This was the thing that the British saw as a challenge. Now, Gandhi didn't stop there. Gandhi now planned a takeover of the salt works. And this has been called a raid. They said, oh, they're going to come raid the salt works. But a raid is usually an attack, a show of violence or destruction. But his followers had a completely different
raid tactic. A different raid tactic.
Completely different raid tactic. So they were going after and I might say this wrong, but the Harsana Salt Works. So this was a British-controlled factory. And what they wanted to do was just walk in and take it. They were just going to walk in and take it. They didn't have guns. They didn't have they didn't even have armor. They had these white suits that they were wearing. And but they did plan it like an army. So there were volunteers lined up in columns and they were wearing these white dhotis, I guess they're called. And it was this uniform. And some of them were carrying stretchers to remove the wounded. So they knew what they were coming up against. And their leader, Rajini Naidu, she led them to this attack in Gandhi's absence. So they're coming up to the salt mine. And on the other side is the British police. And they, of course, are armed. They've got these steel-tipped sticks, and they're heavy sticks, and they're designed specifically to break bones. They've got armor, they've got protection. And what happened is that the first column walked up, the first row walked up, and the British soldiers beat them down.
Yeah.
And then they cleared them away, and the next row came up, and they beat them down. And the next row, and the next row, and the next row, and the next row, and the ones who were injured came and they did it again.
Yeah.
Right? Each row was being struck down. No one fought back. No one raised a hand to defend themselves. The British didn't stop. And there was this American journalist, Webb Miller, who just watched this and described how they were knocking down the Indians' 10 pins in this brutal, mechanical fashion. And eventually 320 people were wounded, 2 were dead, and the Indians had not taken over the salt mines. But the British had lost. This was the true beginning of the end for the British Empire. And what's super interesting about this is that they did it without violence. They didn't attack. They did it with non-violence. And if we look at it in terms of the power dynamics and sort of the rules of power that we're exploring, they really refused to play by the British rules.
Yeah.
The British wanted armed conflict. They wanted the Indians to come attack. They wanted an armed rebellions, and the Indians didn't give it to them. Instead, they forced the British to create a moral disaster. And it's interesting, there was some research done on this about the power of nonviolence. And this guy, Richard Gregg, published a book on this where he talked about the nonviolence and what happened, both politically as well as personally. And there's just a dynamic that when somebody fights you and you fight back, then there's a moral equivalence. You're both going at each other, so it's okay. But if you don't fight back, then there's no moral equivalence. Then the aggressor loses the moral upper hand.
So now I'm going to tell you a playground story. My son, okay? So my son comes to me because he wants to learn how to fight. right? And I said, well, why do you want to learn how to fight? He says, because every time that I go, is playground. So my son's a little chunky, and this kid is making fun of him, right, all the time,
Mhm.
and he wants to fight the kid. And so we had a whole conversation about it. I said, I'm happy to teach you whatever you want to know, because I'm a combat guy, I show you combat, but I'm going to tell you something. That's not where. That's what the guy wants, right? So and what he had been doing up until that point is that the kid comes, he insults him, and then he cries, and then and then the kid keeps insulting him and all that stuff, right? And I said, I want you to try this tomorrow. Whatever the kid says, just double down on it. Whatever he says, just double down, right? So the kid comes up and he goes, "Hey, cheeseburger." And he goes, "Do you want fries with that? Can I get you a milkshake?" And the kid just turns around and runs away.
It's the art of changing the game and the art of nonviolence. Don't fight him. Change the game. Do something different.
Blown
And
away, blown away. He was like, he came home. He was so happy. He's like, I don't understand what happened. It's just like he was blown away by the whole thing. But it's
because there is a limit to power by force. There is a limit to what you can do. And if you lose the moral authority to exert force, it becomes very difficult for you to continue to do that. And the other thing that Greg found was it becomes very difficult for you to justify that to yourself. And
mm,
others have done this, have shown this as well, that when you're beating up somebody who doesn't respond, it's very difficult for you as an individual to continue to do it.
yeah,
And the British soldiers that we were talking about, much like the bully, I'm sure if he'd continued, they had some real psychological issues. A
yeah,
lot of PTSD came out of this because they felt terrible about it. It's one thing if you dehumanize your opponent
yeah.
and your opponent is dehumanizing you and everybody's fighting, then everybody can agree to fight. But when you stop agreeing to fight, you make it impossible for the other side to continue the charade of you are the aggressor, you are out to get me, you are evil, you are bad. And so you end up in this kind of a situation.
Mm,
But you end up in the situation where it's very difficult for you to continue to beat up somebody who's just not fighting back. And that's what the British found out. It was just impossible to continue on this disaster and continue to be the aggressor. And it's ultimately what happened in South Africa as well. So it's amazing the power of these changes. Now, as I was listening to Levitt talk about these protesters. At the same time, on the same day, I came across this article from the BBC. It was actually written in 2019, but I found it on the same day, whatever. It's the 3.5% rule, how a small minority can change the world.
mm,
And there was a woman, her name was Erica Chenoweth. She was a political scientist, or is, I suppose, at Harvard University. And what she looked at was hundreds of campaigns over the last century. And what's interesting is that she set a really high bar for nonviolence, such that the Indian nonviolent campaign against the British didn't even qualify
wow.
as a nonviolent. Okay. So she's actually looking at this like a truly nonviolent. And what she found was that nonviolence was more than twice as effective as violent campaigns at achieving its results. So overall, nonviolent campaigns succeeded or they led to political change 53% of the time,
Mm,
compared to 26% of the time for violent protests. Okay. I think that's fascinating, right? You
yeah.
would think that the thing that's really going to drive change is armed rebellion. But
Well,
over and over again, it's this nonviolence that wins. And the next part about it is the next big question is how many people do you need to successfully launch a nonviolent campaign. And I think that my perception was that it would have to be a massive part of the population. But what she found was that there was no situation, there wasn't any campaign that had failed. This is a quote. There weren't any campaigns that had failed after they had achieved 3.5% participation during a peak event. So if 3.5% of the population is participating in the nonviolent action, historically, every one of those campaigns
It's successful.
has
Yeah.
succeeded. And I think that when we look at politics and we look at the situation that we're in, whether we're looking at American politics today or we're looking anywhere else, you know, it feels powerless, but there are ways for the minority to exercise power and demonstrate power that is very effective, and you don't even need to shoot anybody.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe I'm gonna have to say this, because I've said it earlier today at a different thing. But when the cat's away, the mice will play, right? And so when you do something by force, you have to maintain force to ensure compliance. When there is nonviolence, there is no force required to maintain compliance. So it's a different like, even not just the approach, it's just a different dimension, it's a different world.
Yeah. It becomes impossible to deny. It becomes impossible to fight against. Like if you really have that large number of people rising up against you, it's just impossible to ignore. You have to address it in some way. But I'm going to break your brain a little bit because there's a story in the book Nexus. This is a book by Yuval Harari, and he talks about I think it was Romania or Bulgaria. It was an Eastern European country where there was a programmer, and he was being watched his entire career by this Secret Service guy who just sat next to him and literally watched him his entire career.
Mm.
And Harari makes the point that there has been a huge issue in the past that it has been impossible for a regime to maintain the kind of dominance that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Because it had to be one-on-one, and you couldn't even truly trust the people who were watching the other people.
Yes.
But something has changed. And what's changed is we now have these social networks, and we have people policing other people real time in these social networks.
Yeah.
And we have AI
Policing.
that is able to police the people policing the people. And I think that as we move forward, there's a real question as to how some of this changes in the world of AI. So my argument here is that that 3.5% rule says that there's change that can really happen. I think that it's clear that nonviolence is actually more powerful than violence in social unrest, in causing change. But I think there is a counter to that says that we are in a new era where it is entirely possible that these new structures that we've created are able to keep us in line.
Yeah. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to tie it back. I'm going to say something about what you just said with AI. But I'm going to say something first, and I'm going to tie it back to what you just said. So I did this experiment, right? In this clinic where they take a bunch of people, right? There's 10 people sitting in the clinic, right? And a person walks in and they sit down. And about every 6 minutes, a tone goes off, right? Boop! And when the tone goes off, everybody stands up, right? But there's this new person that's there. They haven't seen this, and they're like, what the hell? So everybody stands up, and then, another tone, boop, and then everybody sits down. And then they come out, and they're like, oh, can so and so, can you come in? And then that person comes in. Then it happens a few times, and after a few times, the new person that came in, they start doing it too. And slowly, one by one, they start removing all the people. As people come into this clinic, it's an actual clinic, and as people come into the clinic for their appointment, they start removing the actors that were the 9 actors that were there in the beginning, right? And now there's all these people that came into the clinic that every time the tone goes off, they stand up. That's what AI can do to us.
That's an
AI can
interesting
police us
Yeah.
in social networks, and then AI steps in and says, "Oh, you're saying this. Oh, let me tell you this," and da 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 da. And you think it's a person, but it's not. It's just an agent that's policing you, and you're going to act just like those people in that room when that thing goes off, and that is terrifying. So
we're going to have to do a whole episode on the power of information, I can
Yeah.
tell. But I think I just want to wrap this one up. Want to bring it back to where we started, the idea of Levitt and her talking about where real power lies.
Mm.
And I think that the thing that we need to think about is I don't think that she understands where real power lies. And I think a lot of times we don't understand in our lives, in the things that we do, where power lies, where power lies. And it may be that the people on the street protesting actually have significantly more power than the man sitting in the Oval Office.
Absolutely.
So just to wrap up, the things to think about: where in your life are you fighting the wrong battle, fighting a bully, right? Where are you accepting the enemy's rules instead of redefining the game? And where are you playing defense when maybe you should be setting the terms, and maybe you should be on offense, even if that means that you're going to be beat up as a part of the process? And where do we as a society start taking control of the political narrative? And I think we have to realize that at some point it could really get uncomfortable, but that if we don't get uncomfortable, if we don't take the actions, if we don't do the things, if we don't become a part of the 3.5%, we're not going to see the result. Something to think about, and that is power and nonviolence and how you can change the game. I'd love your thoughts on power and how you see this playing out. Questions, comments, and side remarks are always welcome. And I think that's about it for this episode. Any parting remarks, Joe?
My parting remark is stay informed. Stay informed.
Stay informed.
Know what's going on around you. Be aware. Keep your eyes open and see where you can bring power to you in your life by staying informed.
And on that, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Masters of Influence.
That's it for this episode of Masters of Influence. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who wants to understand power. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and keep mastering the game.